Welcome to this session of the Sustainable Energy Week. My name is Christa. I'm the Policy Director at Orglim, Europe's technologies industries. I'm very pleased to, as Orglim, organize this panel together with the European Heat Pump Association and UNIDO. So, if we go to the next slide, please. This is the session that you are following, just to make sure that you're at the right session. I'll come back to that in a moment with regards to what I think are some of the key aspects that we're going to touch upon in this panel. But I would like to actually first move to some housekeeping rules. So if we go to the next slide. So you're all muted. So that's important to know. You can, of course, engage, and you will be able to ask questions. You will be able to vote on questions via Slido. Please do include your name and mention your organizations. We will have 2 Q&A sessions throughout the panel. I'll come back to the flow in a moment. But you can start asking questions. We will keep track of that. You can vote on it, and then we will ask those in the Q&A. We will also ask some Slido polls. So this means some pre-prepared questions for you to kind of stimulate a bit of the discussion also with the panelists. And I also want to point out, of course, the event is recorded and will be available to re-watch at a later stage. And here, finally, you see some of the handles and hashtags for kind of Twitter. So please do use them. I'm also keeping track of it. I'll see if something interesting comes through social media too. So next slide, please. So this is your panel for today. Let me start in the order where we basically are going to hear from them. We will start first with Mrs. Montesi, Carla Montesi. She is the director in DG International Cooperation and Development, or DEVCO. So she will kick off. Then we will go to Cassandra Pillai, who is the climate change expert at UNIDO. We will close off this first round of speakers with Malte Lohan, who is the Director General for Orglim. Then we will do a first Q&A, as I said, and around 15 minutes before we go to the next speakers, Thomas Novak, who is Secretary General of the European Heat Pump Association. And we'll close off, last but not least, with Adrian Hill from Energy Cities. He's responsible for EU policy there. So that's kind of the panel. That's the order of the panel. Maybe we can go to the first Slido question. And as we do that, I'll highlight a bit, of course, also the session topics. I understand there's a bit of a delay in when you're seeing the question. I think you will also then quickly be able to kind of vote on this. So the first poll that we want to ask you is to kind of start the debate. How can the EU increase its leadership in the twin climate and digital transitions and also on the global scale? So you'll see a couple of options there, and we'll see the results in a moment. So we'll see now the responses coming in. So please do engage via Slido on that. But as we're doing that, and as the results are coming in, let me just focus for a moment on the content of the session. Right? You've seen the title. I think there's 2 elements important to note that have changed from the moment that we started pulling this panel together. One element is, of course, we talked about smart sector integration. Well, as we know now, the Commission is preparing July 8th a strategy, and it's now called differently. And so we are going to focus a little bit. It's still the same concept, but of course, it's really focused from a different angle. So we're still going to focus on that, of course, on the strategy that's coming up. But we're also, of course, focusing on a little bit the impact of COVID. This, of course, we didn't predict when we were drafting this panel, but it's clear that it will have an impact, and the recovery will have an impact on the integration, energy system integration, and broader the Green Deal objectives. So if I would summarize in a couple of words what we're going to talk about, at the core, of course, it is the goal of the Green Deal, connected to digital transformation. But I also want to talk a bit about COVID and the recovery, but also about the global angle. And I think it's a nice segue into our first speaker. So we want to focus a bit on not just what Europe needs to do, but how can we help other regions doing that, and how other regions are impacting what we're doing. So that's kind of the introduction to the session, which also allowed a bit to have you respond. We got 60 responses to this question. So if we can go back to the results, yes, thank you. So there were four answers: share best practices through industries and SMEs. 37%, increase research and funding, and partner with international organizations. But I think the most popular answer was basically all of the above. So I think that's a good segue into handing it over now to our first speaker. Mrs. Montesi, you have the floor.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Christophe. And let me say good morning to everyone. I'm very happy to join this virtual event. We are in the post-COVID situation, and of course we go through virtual, but let me start by saying that of course we really appreciate the fact that also through the virtual we succeed to tackle and to discuss this strategic issue. Now, the COVID you mentioned, we cannot mention this. Of course, the COVID pandemic is first and foremost a human tragedy. And the COVID recovery, let me say that is the chance for government to show that they are capable of addressing health, economic, and the social impacts, and to build, of course, a more inclusive and resilient society. So the post-COVID economic recovery, and we would like to underline this, and the transition to a sustainable, socially just, resilient, and the climate neutral economy can and should go hand in hand. We know that over the next 2 years, governments around the world, we seek to spend around 10 trillion, amount that will be borrowed from the future generation. So of course, we need to get it right from the get-go. As you know, the European Commission, together supported very strongly by head of state and government, has strongly reconfirmed also very recently that we need to ensure a recovery that is green, digital, just, and resilient. It's a recovery initiative that will have to link investment and debt relief with the SDGs. The public investment also in this phase of the recovery should respect the green oath to do no harm. So this is really a strong engagement from the Commission and the Member States. So also in this phase of the COVID recovery, economic recovery, the Commission has fully reconfirmed its European Green Deal and the digital transformation agenda that was there and was announced just before the COVID. In 2 words, you know, from now that the European Green Deal and the digital transformation agenda are growth model for a sustainable, inclusive, resilient, and future-proof economy. All these principles, let me say, are clearly embedded in all the new financial proposal that came out just recently. As you know, through the Next Generation EU and through the revamped EU budget that the Commission has proposed just a few days ago, every euro of investment will be made available to get Europe back on its feet, but while accelerating the twins, green and the digital transition. So this is very clear also from the new proposal. It will be around 25% of the EU budget that will be spent on climate-related actions. And you know very well that there are some areas that if we have a strong action, we can have a big impact. If we look to the building, all the renovation that will create a new economy restart, the mobility, electrification, the circular economy, the energy, whatever will be renewable, and the green and the hydrogen. So all these are clear objective. It's a clear ambition that the Commission wants to launch through all the Europe and through around the world. When we mentioned this EU economic plan, you have seen that we want to strengthen also our multilateralism. On this, we wanted to strengthen also our international cooperation in order to be able to address all these challenges that today, as you have seen, are global interconnected challenges. You have certainly seen that the European Union was very strongly in support in preparing an EU answer to the COVID, also in support to our development and more fragile partner countries. We have succeeded through a Team Europe approach, so Commission, Member States, European financial institutions to mobilize 36 billion of euro to support our partner countries. I will say that also in looking to this amount and looking to the action that we have proposed, we have tried to focus on short-term economic stimulus measures and support, but in any case, with respecting the principle of doing no harm or building back better in order to foster a green transition wherever possible. So also in our support at the international level, the clear intention is to use our public support to a green transition. So really, we don't want to have public support that will continue to support investment and the development of carbon and resource-intensive economic activities. The principle is clearly green transition. Now, it's something that, of course, it's our ambition, it's our European ambition, but of course it's an ambition that we want to promote at international level with our partner countries. Of course, all this has to be strongly built in a dialogue with our partner countries. But if I take, for example, the situation, our partnership with Africa, as you know very well, we have just adopted a new communication towards a comprehensive strategy with Africa last March. And as you have seen in this strategy, our ambition is really to increase our partnership, even increase a closer partnership with our partner countries, building Africa-Europe Alliance for Sustainable Investment and the Job. But as I'm sure you have seen, we have really added impetus on the green transition and the digital transformation as a catalyst for business investment. So also in this new partnership with Africa that we will have the opportunity to discuss with our partner countries in the autumn, during the African Union, European Union Summit with all the presidents of the Africa, the ambition is clearly this one, build a partnership, but build a partnership that will have as clearly acts of intervention, acts of dialogue, the green transition and the digital transformation. When we look in more detail to this comprehensive strategy with Africa, probably you have seen that our ambition will be to develop an EU-Africa Green Energy Initiative. Maybe I focus on this because I know that it's about your interest. What will be this new initiative will be a comprehensive plan with, I would say, two key overarching priorities. One will be contribute to higher share of renewable energy generation. The second big objective will be to increase the number of African people getting access to affordable, reliable, sustainable energy services, of course, for the households and for the productive use. So the energy component will be and will remain, I know that our cooperation was also very strong on this, but will remain a big priority. Of course, there will be no one-size-fits-all. When we talk about green recovery effort, when we talk about green transition, of course, we will have to have a tailor-made approach with a specific country in the specific country context, looking to the socioeconomic context of the countries, but pushing and acting with our dialogue in order to assure that this green transition happen and will be managed. So move through bilateral dialogue really to promote a green recovery action inspired by the Green Deal. Of course, in any case, to reach our SDGs ambition and the Paris Agreement's commitment too. So it will be a strong, we say, dialogue with our partner countries in order to push this transition to a green and sustainable recovery, and that we will have to look and to link with, of course, the situation of the debt and the debt unsustainability. So clear the engagement, the commitment, and the new financial cycle will have as the key ambition to catalyze and scale up sustainable energy investment by private sector, enforcing a reform, enabling a regulatory framework, developing a level playing field for sustainable green activities, and of course by improving business environment and investment climate that will remain there. So maybe I will stop here saying that of course we will have a crucial time that ahead of us will be a crucial time for our dialogue, but the ambition from the European Union is clear, the ambition of the Green Deal. It's not a luxury ambition, but it's a lifeline out of the crisis to prepare a better world for the future. So clearly our ambition is to translate our ambition on the Green Deal, on the green transition, and a digital agenda very strongly, not just Europe, but also with our partner countries to which our dialogue is there. I stop here. Many thanks for listening, and I really wish you to have a great session and a great debate. Many thanks. Over to you.
Thank you, Mrs. Montesi. I know you cannot join us for the discussion, but do you have time maybe to ask one specific question, to answer one specific question? Would you have time for that still? So
yes,
maybe if I can ask everybody to, if you have a question directed to Mrs. Montesi on what she just said, please submit that now. I will see that coming in. But maybe I'll in the meantime, I'll just quickly ask you a question, comment and then a question. So thank you again for that overview of the European focus on it, but also how we are addressing that globally. So what would you name as maybe the biggest challenge with regards to, for example, the Green Energy Initiative? Where do you think that industry can really help with that?
Of course, yes. And of course, there will be a big and important role from the industry, from the investment. This is very clear. And I'm sure that you have seen our financial proposal. In our financial proposal, we have created new financial instruments. I will take the example of the guarantees that we have tested in the present EMFF, in the present financial instrument, just to have a pilot case. But as you have seen, it's an instrument that will be really very well developed in the future. We have foreseen up of 60 billion of euro in this new financial instrument that will be the guarantees. And as you have seen in the latest proposal, in the next generation, Next Generation, the European Commission has already foreseen 102 additional billion in a guarantee capacity. Why it is? Because we are sure that the private sector, the industry, can play a really very, very important role in achieving also this ambition, and that these new financial instruments are there in order to really support the private sector. So we will act with the European development banks, with the financial institutions, in order to put in place the right instrument that can be used by the private sector, by the academy, by the research community, by the industry, in order to have investment projects that will help us to achieve this green transition. So all the instruments are there, all the instruments are foreseen. There will be an enormous and huge amount of funds that will be available for also the European industry, also the industry of our partner countries, but also for the European industry, and there is huge work to do. Let me say that if I can identify one problem that we have today, it's not the fact that there are funds that are missing, but the crucial problem is to have great and good investment project that could be supported by our financial institutions. So let's have the industry work on that. There is a lot of space, and it's not just a space, we count on the European Union industry, we count on the small and medium enterprise for our partner countries to build and to help the public sector to achieve this ambitious green transition agenda. Over to you.
Thank you for your answer. And just looking kind of at the timing, I would propose we go to the next speaker. I know there was a question coming in, but we can handle that in the Q&A. You won't be here, but maybe somebody of your team will be here still to pick it up and follow up separately. But so thank you very much, Ms. Montesi, for joining us.
Thank you to you, and I confirm that there is one member of my team that will remain with you. Many thanks, once again, many thanks to have organized this event, this discussion.
Thank you. Good. So let's move to the next speaker. So Cassandra Pillai from UNIDO. Cassandra, it's up to you.
Thank you, Christa. Well, good morning and good afternoon, everyone, depending on where you're tuning in from. I'm very happy to be here today to speak about two very important transitions that are taking place, and I'm also very pleased to hear from Ms. Montesi on how seriously the digital and climate transition is being taken in the EU Green Deal. So that's just fantastic news. Mostly because these two transitions provide us with an opportunity to transform the way we have been operating towards a way that is safe for the climate, especially as we recover from the pandemic. So we know a few things. We know that by 2025, there will be 75 billion electronic devices that are connected. This will drastically increase the amount of data shared and also the amount of information we have. We also know that despite the Paris Agreement being signed in 2015, emissions has continued to rise between 2016 and 2019, of course, notwithstanding the emission reduction, but because of the COVID restrictions. And that industry represents 1/3 of these emissions. We know that in order to reach the goals as outlined in the Paris Agreement, industry will need to decarbonize between 65 to 90% by 2050, based on 2010 levels. This is a lot of work for us to do. We at UNIDO, which is a specialized agency of the United Nations, focus on assisting our member states to industrialize inclusively and sustainably. More recently, we've been trying to understand the synergies between digital technologies as well as the clean energy transition. Next slide, please. I think I do have some slides. Yes, I do. Yes. And what we do know between the synergies of digital technologies and sustainable energy is that it's highly influenced by technological innovations. It's dependent on the development of new sustainable infrastructures, and that is a potential enabler for new and innovative business models. Next slide, please. So the ability for countries to adopt such technologies are also very highly dependent on how industrialized they are. And this is dependent on how much manufacturing value added per capita they have. As you can see, there are 4 country categories here: industrialized, emerging industrial economies, developing countries, and least developed countries. So different countries and different types of frontier technologies will be relevant on a case-by-case basis. So of course, it's not a one-size-fits-all toolkit that can be deployed across all countries. Next slide, please. So UNIDO released a report back in 2017 entitled Accelerating Clean Energy Through Industry 4.0, Manufacturing the Next Revolution, to delve further into understanding the types of technology, whether it's blockchain or rapid prototyping or Internet of Things, what exactly and how, if possible, it can accelerate the clean energy transition. I would highly recommend you to read it if this is something of interest to you. Next slide, please. So amidst the various policy recommendations that were included in the report, I would like to highlight 3, which I feel is really important for countries to capitalize on the various digital development benefits. One is to maneuver the innovation race to really assist, especially climate vulnerable countries who may not have the adequate capacity or access to financing to do so. Of course, with strong partnership together with EU counterparts, whether it's the European Commission or various industries, how they can share such knowledge. That we also need to encourage governments to increase the agility of adopting policies at a quick enough pace to avoid potential adverse impacts on the environment if this is not done quickly enough. And this will, of course, prevent the deepening of global inequalities. In the event that global South countries or least developed countries are unable to tap into such development benefits, we will, of course, see the widening of the digital divide and a rollback of all development efforts that we've made thus far. Next slide, please. In light of this, I would like to highlight that we are at the cusp of economically recovering and potentially facing post-pandemic realities pretty soon. And if you are interested to learn more on how we can do so by capitalizing on digital technologies and to do so in a climate-safe manner, I'd like to invite all of you to participate in the Vienna Energy Forum that is meant to take place between the 5th to 7th July in 2021 at the Hofburg Palace here in Vienna, where I am based and where UNIDO is headquartered at. The VEF will be conducting a few consultation series beginning to already start in September, so do mark this down in your calendars. And for more information, please follow the displayed social media accounts. So I will stop there. Thank you, Christoph.
Thank you, Cassandra. To kind of stick to the time and also, touch upon a wide range of the topics like digital, but also the social aspects. We'll come back to that in the Q&A. Malte Lohan, as Director General of Orgalim, to provide a bit of the view of Europe's technology industries. Malte?
Christoph, thank you very much. Good morning, good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. Orgalim is glad to be a strategic partner again on EU Sustainable Energy Week and really glad to co-organize this session. If we can go to the next slide, please. The industries that Orgalim represents have a very specific stake in this debate because we are providers of clean tech solutions here at home in Europe and across the world, but we are also, of course, users of energy in our own right. Europe's technology industries span the mechanical, electrotechnical, the metal technology sectors. In total, that's about 1/3 of Europe's industry. And we are drivers of innovation throughout the economy, including for the digital and the climate transition in advanced manufacturing, in transport, in energy, buildings, you name it. So this is a major growth market for our industries. At the same time, our industries rely on continuous energy supply for their own manufacturing activities here in the European Union and providing jobs for more than 11 million Europeans employed directly by our industries. So we have a double stake in this debate in ensuring reliable access to affordable, secure, sustainable energy for all Europeans and setting a global standard in energy technology. If we go to the next slide, please. Like the rest of Europe, we are facing the steepest decline since World War II as a result of the COVID-19 pandemic. 500,000 jobs are at risk in our industries alone, and we're now expecting the recovery to last well into 2021. So it's an unprecedented situation. It requires an unprecedented EU-wide response. And we have welcomed the proposed next generation EU recovery package as an opportunity to speed up our climate and digital transitions, and an opportunity for establishing firmly Europe's global leadership in clean tech. Just think about this. We have 8 of the top 20 global clean tech leaders based here in Europe, more than any other market. This is where we have the industrial advantage. If we get it right now, this is our chance to create long-term sustainable growth opportunities for Europe's companies and Europe's citizens. So the policy choices behind the recovery plan are going to be critical. And how are we going to seize that opportunity to accelerate the path to a future energy system? That's what I want to focus on for the next couple of minutes. If we can go to the next slide, please. The European Green Deal aims to make Europe the first climate neutral continent by 2050. To get there, we believe a totally different energy system is required. So what does that mean? It means, most importantly, a future energy system that is significantly more local, but also more interconnected and digitally enabled. That's the precondition for seizing the benefits of electrification, of renewables, of the energy efficiency opportunities that are still out there. And that also requires more sector coupling between the energy, buildings, and transport sectors in particular, and more use of power-to-X technologies. So we really welcome the focus on this agenda, also with the energy system integration strategy that we're expecting at the beginning of July. Next slide, please. 5 blocks of action that are for us really critical. First of all, we have to continue putting energy efficiency first. That must be the principle in every policy measure and every policy action. We support an increased energy efficiency target for 2030 to drive this, focusing in particular at the systems level. We also note that the energy efficiency gap in the national energy and climate plans is still not closed. Second, renewables. As the renewables increase in our energy system, we will have to become more decentralized. We expect that by 2030, about half of the energy will come from decentralized renewable energy sources, and 90 to 95% of that will have to be integrated at the distribution level. And that also requires smarter distribution grids to accommodate these this uptake of renewables. The main challenge at the level of the grid in the future will not be having sufficient capacity to meet demand at peak times. We expect that it will be about avoiding supply and demand drifting apart. And that means we have to tap into flexibilities at all levels. That's where the smart grids come in. Smart integrated connected buildings will be a critical source of that flexibility, as will demand response, storage, and flexible generation solutions, amongst others. Infrastructure, of course, is going to be critical in this. We have important initiatives with the future mobility strategy that will be a key pillar of the transition. The 10E evolution, which we support, but which also needs to focus more on the local level. And of course, digital infrastructure, 5G, fiber networks that have to be rolled out urgently. And finally, innovative market design, focused on demand side flexibility with active consumers, with energy communities, with more combination of centralized and decentralized electricity production existing together in a fair manner. Next slide, please. And I will finish with this. What we saw during the COVID-19 crisis is the costs when the member states start going it alone. As Europe, we have to work together on this agenda. And the member states have to work together. It's the only way we will seize the opportunities that are ahead of us, and there's no time to lose. This is not just about looking inward, it's also about looking out Europe's place in the world. And Cassandra and Ms. Montesi talked about this. It's about our competitiveness compared to other major markets. We need massive investments into clean tech and digitalization with a long-term horizon. That's about R&D and innovation. It's about infrastructure. And the recovery plan needs to prioritize these. We need a clear governance for the allocation of these recovery funds and for channeling private investments to the right projects. And that includes robust, transparent, workable criteria for how these funds are going to be allocated. And finally, we need a global level playing field. That means Europe has to push the rest of the world to move forward with us with a mix of carrot and stick. And that will only happen if Europe is truly acting together. That's all I wanted to share now, Christoph, and I look forward to our discussion in a moment. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Malte. So this kind of concludes the first round of speakers. So we will kind of have a second Slido poll, which you see now. So can digital technologies help the EU achieve the 2030 climate targets? I think it's a relevant question because it did came up in every speaker's comments. So as we see those polls kind of coming in, we will then also open a Q&A discussion, but maybe I can already start, I'm tracking a bit the questions that are coming in, but let me start with a question that I had, which is going back to one of the core things of the session description, right? It is the energy system integration. We talked about that. Now, I think there's still probably some people also following this, and they're still kind of trying to figure out what does that actually mean, your energy system integration, and how are you looking at it? So maybe I'll ask first, Malte, maybe if you can kind of come back to that point with regards to the system integration. What does that mean for Orgelime? And I know you've put up some aspects that are needed, but can you again say that what this means within Orgelime's understanding?
Sure. Thanks, Christoph. And let me take the example of the transport sector. I mentioned this briefly, and I mentioned that we welcome the focus on this also in the future strategy around alternative fuels. It's clear that the transport sector has to play a critical role in the shift to a clean energy system and ultimately meeting the Paris Agreement commitments. And that is, of course, about electrification, but it is not just about electrification. So we see the transport sector as part of managing the decarbonization of electricity generation, where batteries, where fuel cell vehicles can be one important pillar. And as long as the infrastructure for recharging is not fully in place across Europe, as long as the consumers are not able to take advantage of smart grids to really use that infrastructure in the best way, we won't be able to make full use of the vehicles as a kind of integral part of the energy system. Because the vehicles in their own rights will help with demand response, will help with storage capacity, will help with flexibility and grid stability. And so this is, an obvious case where the future evolution of the transport and the mobility sector needs to be looked at hand in hand with the future evolution of energy grids, of energy generation, of renewables, and so on.
Thank you, Malte. And so maybe what I will turn towards now is looking at some of the questions. And I think one of the questions that got the most votes for the moment was, let me close on the poll first. So if you could go back to the poll, sorry for that. So the poll, I think the answer to that was that yes, but meaning, so we have 78 people responding. So can digital technologies help the EU achieve the 2030 climate targets? I think no is definitely in the minority. So yes, but yes, but. And so maybe we'll talk about the but part in a moment, like what is needed to have it actually enable us to reach 2030, but also, of course, towards 2050. So let me park that for a moment. I want to go to one of the questions that were raised, which goes back a bit also to the, like looking at the global angle, right? And the presentation of Mrs. Montesi. And the question that I have here is, can the green transition create enough decent jobs also in poorer countries? So was there any assessment of impact and opportunities carried out? Now, Mrs. Montesi is not on the call anymore, but I still thought it was important to flag that. And I don't know, maybe link it to another question that came in, which was towards UNIDO. So maybe Cassandra, you can answer that one. To what extent do you have a view on that first question? But also, to what extent is the Commission and UNIDO working together with regards to kind of engaging in those in partner countries? So Cassandra, do you want to maybe answer that?
Yes, thank you, Christoph. Should I also have a go at the just transition element and how those who are employed in perhaps more emission-intensive sectors will be affected in developed countries, as well as our partnership with the EU on different projects? Or
yeah, go ahead. Yes.
Sure. So in regards to the first question, there was a wide recognition and also concern for those, not only industries, but those who are employed in emission-intensive sector, be it coal or gas or oil, and what will happen there. And this is why I'm also really happy to see that the EU Green Deal strongly addresses the issue of just transition. At the previous UN Climate Change Conference at COP24 in Katowice, the Just Transition Silesia Declaration was adopted by all countries to address the specific issues. So there are policies that are being enacted. The various UN agencies are also trying to understand better the issues of stranded assets. So if utilities that are producing more energy from fossil fuel-based energy, what's going to happen to them? Are they going to be stranded? How can policies or financing help them transition justly and in a way that's climate safe? So there are policies in place. And as I said, this declaration was only adopted a couple of years ago, so it's still very new. We're still trying to understand how, but there is the recognition there that we have to do claim in a climate safe manner. In the question of digitalization, is also concerned that jobs will be reduced because of this. But there are also studies being done on the impact of digitalization in the workforce. I think I recall one particular study by Carl Frey from Oxford, and he showed how countries that are able to upgrade the skills of the employees, such as in Denmark and Sweden, versus a country in Ethiopia or Kenya who were not able to upgrade the skills of social work of their workers in the agricultural sector. And of course, you see that they will lose out if they were not supplied with the appropriate capacity building activities to prevent job losses from happening. So I feel that a lot of lessons can be learned not only from international organizations, but from the EU, how they're trying to already address this question and how this can be then shared to other small island developing states or very climate vulnerable countries, which includes least developed countries. UNIDO has a very strong partnership with the European Union across a wide area of activities, from agriculture, assisting countries to produce food that is of a certain quality in a safe way to ensure that the ethical standards are addressed so that they can export these products to European countries. We also recently have the Parliamentary Action on Climate and Energy that is co-funded by the European Union to raise awareness to members of Parliament on the dangers of climate change and why it is important for members of Parliament to promote large renewable and energy efficiency projects, be it smart grids or e-mobility. projects. So this is something that's being co-funded by the European Union. We also partner with various member states who are donors within the EU that actively support various initiatives around the world, such as the Austrian government through the regional energy centers to help promote renewable energy. So there are large existing projects, and we always only look forward to increase our partnerships with this very important entity.
Thank you, Cassandra. I don't know, by the way, Thomas, if you want to jump in at any point, or Adrian, also on any of the questions, please let me know. But just kind of, with 5 minutes left for this Q&A, before we kind of go to Thomas, just going back to the digitalization part, right? The digital element. Yeah, the answer of most participants was, yes, we believe that will help. But is there anything that you would like to share on that? For example, Thomas or Malte or Adrian, coming also from kind of the industry perspective on that. Anybody wants to go first? Like, what is the but part? What do we need to get right to have digital really enable this transition?
I can start that, and I can also revert it to the question that is just posted last. If the technology is in place, what are the main obstacles in your view? I think that is a very good augmentation. In my view, and you will hear this later, we have all the technologies that it needs to decarbonize the heating sector available today. So we don't need huge research programs, we need deployment, and we need to do this fast, and we need to activate end-user involvement. And the main issue that I think we have, and that was mentioned by Malte, is that we should focus and continue to focus energy efficiency first. That's a very good slogan. But unfortunately, energy efficiency first at the moment doesn't pay off. So if you're an end user that wants to invest in the most efficient heating system, and you may not be surprised that this is a heat pump, then you will pay more than if you buy the cheapest available heating system, which is a fossil boiler. And so many people ask themselves, why should I forego the investment in a nice new kitchen or my holidays in favor of a heating system which provides heat in both ways? And the more environmentally friendly one is more expensive than the more environmentally polluting one. And I think this fundamental equation needs to change. And it's prepared like this by policymakers. So it's policymakers that can and must change that. But how do you change that? I mean, maybe you'll go into your presentation on that, right? You want me to give all?
All right, save that for your presentation. I don't want you to give it all away yet. But I don't know, Malte or Adrian, anything from your side on that, on the digital?
Well, Christoph, if I may, I would like to highlight two things, kind of yes, but. The first but is relating to the time horizon. So we all know that the period between now and 2030 is critical if we want to get to our 2050 goals. And we are now, of course, in the process of reviewing the 2030 targets for all the right reasons. But the longer that process takes, the shorter the time frame that is left running up to 2030, where companies will have to make long-term investment decisions. And as that time horizon shrinks, it will get more and more difficult to make the right decisions. So we are really also insisting on the need for speed when it comes to this process of setting our 2030 agenda. And that needs to be in place for really reaping the opportunities of digital that we mentioned. The second but is around investment power. Investments, of course, public and private are about money first and foremost, but they are also about the regulatory conditions, the framework which is in place to unlock that investment, including the criteria I mentioned that at the beginning that are designed to channel the investments to the right quote-unquote projects and priorities, such as, for example, the sustainable finance taxonomy. Those need to be made fit for purpose. If we are going to use digital technology and to seize the potential of digital technology, we need to get those framework conditions right to make sure that the investment is really unlocking the potential and is channeled to the right priorities, and that is not self-evident, and I think more work is needed on that.
Great, Adrian, maybe from your side, any thoughts on that?
Yeah, briefly. Yeah, I agree with Thomas in many ways. The technology we need is there. What we need to do is combine them and roll them out as fast as possible, as Malta says. The longer we keep talking, the less time we have to do these things. And from our point of view as cities, when we're talking about doing these things, we're talking about things like investing in district heating. It's a massive investment. It takes a lot of planning. There's a lot of different elements that go into it. If we want to have district heating elements up and running by 2030, we really need to start now. So yeah, time is of the essence, but the technology is there. It's a matter of rolling it out. And that requires a top line, clear direction from policymakers, both locally at the city level, invoking things like heating low emission zones like we have for cars already. And it comes from the top level from people like Commissioner Simpson, who need to say, you know what, we're getting out of gas. We have, which is implicit in a net zero Europe by 2050. But we need to set a really clear direction so that private individuals and companies, when they're investing in things like their home heating system or in public transport or what have you, they can see that down the line, whether there's regulations in place now, the reality is we're going to a low carbon future and they can invest accordingly.
Thanks, Adrian. I don't want you also to give away most of your presentation. So maybe I'll stop the Q&A at this moment. We will come back, so you'll have more time to ask questions, so please keep submitting them. But if I could ask the slide to appear for the next speaker, so you already heard from him, but you will hear a bit more now from Thomas from the European Heat Pump Association. Thomas?
Thank you, Christoph. And there's not going to be any slides, because I thought for once I would try what I have read in so many presentation books, try to speak and don't distract the attention of the audience. When I prepared this, and when we prepared this event, actually, it was good fun. We had good discussions on how to create a society that is clean, competitive, and connected. And I'm very thankful for the opportunity to discuss and to present one solution. It's one, but we have a few more. And I thought if we would start with a blank sheet and we would give the task to a group of scientists to develop a decarbonized heating and cooling system, they would probably say, we can do that, no problem. We need a multi-billion research program. We could call it Horizon Europe Plus, and we would find solutions for industry, for residential buildings, for cities, and so on. The solutions should comply with a certain number of conditions. They should use less energy than today, ideally no energy. They should make use of renewable energy on site. They should not emit CO2 at the point of operation. They should be particulate matter free. We don't want any additional diesel gates in the building sector. They should help to stabilize the grid, so this connectivity. They should make use of digital solutions. They should ideally keep manufacturing power and employment in Europe. They should be easy to install. They should be for all applications, as I've mentioned. And if possible, they could even create an export potential. So UNIDO would be happy and DEFCO would also be happy. And maybe then people would say, well, that we can't do. But luckily, we have this technology already, and that is the technology that I represent, and I'm a big fan of it. It's a heat pump. And a heat pump can be used in residential buildings, in commercial buildings, in this industry, in district heatings, and in big buildings. It's based on European technology, so many of Malta's members are actually providers of technology. Many of Adrian's members are users of that technology. It is providing a support function for the high renewable share electric grid, because heat pumps can provide demand-side flexibility potential, and quite a bit. So they're probably the cheapest battery that you can find. And they don't produce any emissions at the point of operation. I've been to Krakow in January. I was jogging in the morning. I couldn't continue my run because somebody was burning maybe their old running shoes. They should have put them to better use, but at least I had a yellow flume of smoke coming out. This would not happen if you have a better technology. And also they support indoor air quality, indoor environmental quality, because you can provide the right humidity, the right level of temperature, heating and cooling, and avoid volatile organic compounds. Luckily, it is indeed at the moment a European technology that we're talking about. Heat pumps for heating, for cooling, for industrial applications. They currently are sold in a number of 1 to 1.3 million units. 1.5 million units is the next target that we are looking at. And a lot of this is from Europe, and the rest is actually tied in quite nicely into international value chains. And that's the thing that I also find quite important. There is a huge international research and development project ongoing that is mutually reinforcing, mutually beneficial to people on different parts of this globe to develop this technology forward and to make it more useful even for those areas of buildings and industry where we still have some ambition that needs to be to make them better. You asked now, what could we do to accelerate that deployment? And I think there's two things that we need to do. We need to activate end user purchasing power. That's what we could do by correcting the price situation, by correcting the relative prices between the price for 1 kilowatt hour of heating for using fossil energy, oil and gas at the moment, but even in some pockets of Europe, we still use coal for burning. This could be achieved by looking at the energy taxation, which most often is taxing electricity much stronger than it's taxing fossil fuels. The introduction of a CO2 price signal, I think, is of paramount importance. It's not an ETS for buildings, but it should have a similar effect than the ETS has with a different mechanism, but also for the building sector. And we have heard similar ideas for the transport sector. We are still subsidizing fossil fuels. That's something I don't understand, and I don't understand why it's so difficult to push them out. If I was a policymaker, that would be the thing that happened tomorrow morning. And we should give a priority to electrification in an efficient manner, because that is also a very efficient, that's the most efficient way of using energy. And then we need to announce this early. Adrian has mentioned zones. Cities have declared already no emission zones. They have declared renewable energy zones. They have declared no gas zones. The whole country, the Netherlands, has said we will move out of gas by 2025, out of fossil gas, that is. Because I agree, it is a long process and we need to start announcing this early. And I will close with quoting Thorsten Herdan. He's from the German Ministry of Economics. He was speaking yesterday and he said, once you start renovating your building, you have to do it right in order to avoid that in the future you're eaten up by higher heating costs. So it's not enough to simply replace the boiler today and think, okay, then I have a renewable energy source maybe, and that is good enough. But I still have the high energy demand. I should do both. I should renovate the building and then put in the best technology. And we have hybrid solutions, so this can even be done in staged renovation projects, but it has to start, it has to be announced soon, so that all players in the value chain can adjust their behavior and their planning towards a zero emission future of Europe. Thank you.
Thank you, Thomas. Definitely a couple of things I want to follow up on in the next Q&A. But before I do that, maybe again, Adrian, if you could give a bit the perspective of from a city's perspective, right, on these challenges. So, Adrian, over to you.
Great, thanks very much. Yeah, from a city's perspective, and it's funny that the title of this session is Clean.Competitive.Connected, which could very well be a session about mobility. Because when I think about sector integration, I really think about it as a mobility plan, which cities are very good at. Cities are good at developing mobility plans. They've been doing it for years, some better than others. And when you develop a mobility plan, you look at maps, right? Ideally, lots of maps. You look at the departure points, the destination points, the flows, the bottlenecks, the projections for the future, and your mobility plan then tries to smooth it all out as much as possible, as quickly as possible, and ideally for as little investment as possible. And when I think about sector integration, I think it's exactly the same thing. We're trying to move watts and joules and British thermal units and everything else within a system. And we need different conveyances and different ways of doing it. But essentially, we're talking about a mobility plan for energy. And so that begins with maps in the same way as it does for transport. So from a city's point of view, one thing we've been playing with in the last couple of years is a Horizon project called Hot Maps. And that's been tested in 7 cities right now. And that allows them to map out where their heat demand is, who's using heat, how much, where their heat potential is. So do they have an old mine, as they've used in Heerlen in the Netherlands, that can be used as a heat resource? and then you want to map out your future projections. So as you renovate your buildings, as Thomas and Malta have been talking about, that demand is going to go down. So you want to make sure that your plans anticipate that, so the energy can be directed in the right way. So in answer to one of the questions in this session, which is what is the no regret option? From a city's point of view, the very first no regret option is mapping out all of that heat, and especially where do you have excess heat. If you have data centers in your city, you've got a load of excess heat right there. Then you need to commoditize that. You need to turn it, give it a value, and then you need to take that heat and get it to somewhere else, because that excess heat is invariably the most efficient and cheapest heat you're going to get, so long as you can build the infrastructure to tap into it. So with something like hot maps to tie in to the circular economy and digital transformation element, it's an open source, user-driven planning software that's really built from the bottom up. So that's one example of how these two things fit together. Without that digital ability to do an open source ground up planning, you can't get the payoff of developing something like a district heating system. And the district heating system, to extend the transport metaphor, is very much, that's your metro. That's how you build your metro. And we all know, when we look at our cities today, if you've got a major motorway going through the center of your city, or you've got a clean, efficient underground metro, we know which city we'd rather be in. We know which city is better, right? So that's really how we try to think about these things, because for too much and for too long, heat has been the forgotten element of the sort of environmental movement. So in the Green Deal, we really need to see a greater focus on that. What district heating and cooling does, to bring in some of the elements that Malta was talking about as well. I mean, obviously they're low carbon. I mean, there were a few that have been coal powered in the east, but once you have the infrastructure there, it's very easy to upgrade them using Thomas's heat pumps to be low carbon heat providers. They provide energy storage and balancing services, which is really key to go hand in hand with the greening of the grid. They're an integration platform. So what we see in Denmark, for example, is where you've got a lot of wind power. There's plenty of days where you've got excess wind power. That wind power can then be converted into heat to be stored within the district heating system, district heating and cooling system, which is actually quite important, because it's 38 degrees in Siberia this week. We're going to be using a lot more cooling in the future, and that meeting that future demand is going to be much easier if we have district heating in place. So there's a whole slew of really positive things from a city's point of view about how to really practically address and integrate heat and energy and electricity and gas within a district heating system. One of the other examples that we have, as I mentioned, is in the Netherlands, is in Heerlen. So Heerlen, and this goes into the just transition idea too, right? So Heerlen is an old coal mining region in the Netherlands. Back in the 60s and 70s, all of their coal mines closed down. If you listen to Frans Timmermans, he'll tell you about his grandfather was a coal miner there. So what they started to do now in the last 10 years is, after the coal mines were closed, they filled with water. And so all of a sudden you've got a water reservoir under the city, and they've dug a series of boreholes into that water. And what they can do is they then draw that, and that's their thermal battery, which they use to feed into their district heating system, both for heating and for cooling. And they combine that with excess heat from supermarkets, from gyms, other seasonal geothermal sources. And by bringing all of that together, we have an example for Europe's coal regions where you can have a really low carbon just transition, and you're developing those local resources. So that's one of the key things, especially as we push for things like heating low emission zones, right? Which, if you take the equivalent of what we have here in Brussels, for example, we now have a low emission zones for cars. So we're progressively mandating that cars in this city need to be more and more efficient up until 2035, when they'll all be electric. We'd like to see that with heating as well. So at a certain point in time, oil heating is just no longer acceptable. The same goes then with gas boilers. With a long enough lead time that we're not changing gas boilers that were installed last year, but we are slowly but surely making our way towards that low carbon future in our cities.
Thank you. Thank you, Adrian. What I really like about, if I can say so about the panel, is really diverse perspectives, right? We have, from a city's perspective, from a government perspective, also including the social aspects of it and industry. So, before we go into the next Q&A, let me launch the last Slido poll. We'll have a word cloud in the end. So, but this, Slido poll is really focused on, of course, smart sector integration, or energy system integration. But that's again the title that we had before. What do you think really needs to happen for this strategy to be successful? So there's a couple of options there. So let's wait for a bit for that to come in. But I want to use this question also as a segue then to the question to open the Q&A session to our panelists. So you're all outlining a bit your view on what it actually means, right? This integration. It's about industry, transport. It's about, of course, the energy suppliers. It's about buildings. There's a lot of activity. You all mentioned a couple of regulatory activities that, of course, are taking place as part of the Green Deal and earlier. So my question is, isn't the challenge in itself what we're going to see now, how to continue to connect all of these different initiatives, regulatory initiatives under these different sectors, how to bring that all together that it also doesn't make it so difficult for operators that are operating in different sectors, right? How do you get a uniform approach? What is your view on that? And then we'll turn towards the challenges on the technology side, and I'll have a look also at some of the questions coming in. But anyone wants to start on that question about, what's the regulatory glue? Is it this strategy or is it something else? Who wants to go first, Thomas?
I would say we have a lot of regulatory measures in place already. The Clean Energy for All Europeans is a great package that needs to be implemented now. It foresees a renewable heat share, a specific subsector target that is probably not met because the ambition level on achieving it is not there. So really there needs to be a focus on each member state's level, and maybe the Commission can balance and collect best practice and provide best practice advice, and maybe cities can do the same. I think cities really are very important because sometimes and quite often they are more ambitious because they're in direct contact with the people. So if the city has a pollution problem, the city mayor has a problem. If the city of Krakow has a pollution problem, Ursula von der Leyen. So the connectivity of the policymaker on the ground to the problem owner is much stronger in cities, and that can be used by the existing tools. We also have, Adrian mentioned the need for measuring and for mapping. In the Energy Efficiency Directive, there is quite an overlooked tool. It's called Comprehensive Heat Assessment. And that could be used and could be executed more in order to provide better information on the energy demand and how and why and where heat is used, and also cooling, because heating and cooling are just two coins of the same metal, at least when it comes from a heat pump perspective. Any heat pump is providing heating and cooling. And also if we have big district heating systems, then they can use big heat pumps. So regulation here, I think, is super important, but then I come back to what I said before. It has to pay off, because the person in the end says, why should I pay for this if I'm not getting any benefit? And at the moment, society is paying for pollution and not the individual. And we have to reverse that. The individual has to pay for pollution and needs to be benefited if they don't pollute.
All right, Christoph, I think you're still on mute.
Sorry. So after 3 months of lockdown, still get it wrong. So apologies for that, was muted. So, so Adrian, my question was follow up to you. If you look at what Thomas also just said, but if you look at all of the actions at European level and you're looking at the local level, do you feel there is really a strong connection there, or do you feel that there is a bit of a disconnect? And if so, how do we improve that?
Yeah, there's definitely a disconnect, and that disconnect varies a bit between different cities. So, a Paris or an Amsterdam or a London, a lot of times, as Thomas says, A, they're very ambitious, but B, they have the resources and the knowledge to tap into things at the EU level. They have liaison officers. They know what's going on. Most of us don't live in Paris or Amsterdam or London. We live in smaller cities of 10,000 or 50,000 people. And that's where the disconnect is really large, because these are cities that don't necessarily have the skills or the capacity or the understanding of what's going on to be able to fulfill the EU ambitions. Those cities need a lot more support and a lot more help to get up to speed. The exception is like the example Thomas gave of Krakow. If there's a dirty air, then that's a municipal priority. But most municipalities, it's potholes, it's making sure the rubbish is collected. These are the day-to-day things that consume them, and they don't have a lot of resources to start coming up with extended visions. So it's really, really important that if the EU wants to successfully implement a lot of the plans under the Green Deal, that we foresee that support for cities to be able to actually implement the change they're demanding. Hopefully we'll see some of that in the Climate Pact, based on the Covenant of Mayors and initiatives like that. But a lot more needs to be there.
Great, thanks, Adrian. So I'm going to close the poll, right? We have 65 people responding, and I think the biggest kind of response was on the removing the barriers to kind of smart sector integration. I think that's kind of what we were talking about, like what are those barriers, right? Maybe Malte, to kind of build on that, I talked about the regulatory part, and you can still comment on that, like, what's the glue, how do we make it work, but also on the technology part, what are some of the barriers that you see? I think you mentioned smart grids earlier. How do you see other barriers, but also how to remove those? And then Cassandra, I'll come back to you. And in the meantime, please do keep submitting some questions because I think most of them are still the same. So we'll come back to your questions in a moment. But Malte, and then maybe Cassandra.
Yeah, Christoph, there's a whole list of things, of course, to mention. Let me focus on one that builds a little bit on the discussion around smart grids and the role that they will have to play in this transition to a new energy system. And I mentioned very briefly at the beginning the 10E regulation, which of course is about supporting the uptake of kind of future-facing grids. We feel that is not currently fit for purpose to really go forward on smart grids. We're concerned that it is not sufficiently addressing the needs, in particular at the distribution level, so we have called for a kind of dedicated legislative instrument that helps push for smart grid projects at the distribution level, and that also helps to review the criteria that make smart grid projects eligible under the 10E regulation. So, important kind of practical steps that are needed to really unlock this wider potential.
Good, thank you, Malte. So building on that, so Cassandra, I don't know if you have any input on that specifically. If not, I want to come back to one of the questions. So specifically the one on digitalization and it's improving efficiency, but also it sometimes reduces jobs. So there is a labor impact here. So if you could answer that, but if you want to say something about what has already been said, please do so.
In terms of removal of barriers, nothing more to add, I feel, apart from what has been discussed apart from maybe assisting developing countries with their means of implementation, I mean, there is expressed interest, of course, to uptake renewable energy, but it needs to be combined with appropriate technology transfer and appropriate financing and capacity building, or else it would be near impossible. I think it will also help to encourage or support local entrepreneurs to devise clean technology solutions as they are closer to the problems on the ground, and developing policies or mechanisms to help a particular local entrepreneur to patent the idea instead of risking them selling a clean technology solution to a larger corporate and shifting the value they might have added to Senegal or Nigeria and shifting that to elsewhere. So that's what I would say in terms of appropriate regulatory frameworks. And on digital and jobs, sorry, Christa, what was the question again?
So the question you see here on the screen, it was on the screen, I think, which was the question about, digitalization, right? We're talking about that. It's really a good thing, right? Because it can increase effectiveness, efficiency. At the same time, there's also this fear that, of course, it will mean that some jobs will be lost, some jobs will be kind of, redirected, and people have to be retrained. What is, I don't know if this is something you're focused on, but I just want to ask you the question, what is your take on that and UNIDO's take on digital and the social impact?
For UNIDO, we understand the significance and the opportunities associated with the fourth industrial revolution. We are keen to assist countries tap into these benefits and reduce the negative benefits. We also have a curricula to help upgrade skills based on a survey and how do you tailor that to a particular country. We recognize that this transition will not only happen in Europe. I mean, it's absolutely fantastic that this is strongly recognized in the EU Green Deal. However, this will also have spillover effects to the rest of the globe. So how do we really, promote first the awareness of least developed countries into first understanding, that these type of technologies exist, and then how do they tap into that? What kind of skills are needed? Some rural areas in Kenya, for instance, that don't have access to electricity and need to industrialize. How do we tap into big data or satellite images to help understand which are the most climate vulnerable areas and have potential for solar mini grids to be deployed? Really just increase the awareness of that. And in terms of jobs, yes, we're really looking into skills upgrading for a wide variety of countries.
Thank you, Cassandra. So maybe a question now, I think it was mentioned before with regards to, I think also I saw it in some of the questions, like demand side flexibility, right? How do we create a market where it's increasingly also decentralized, local, renewable energy sources, also at the local and individual household and industrial level? This requires a bit more of a flexibility. So the question that I have here is, what are the obstacles towards going in that direction, right? Or maybe first of all, do you agree with that that's the way to go? And if so, what are the challenges and how do we fix it? So anybody wants to go first? Thomas?
I think this is a very important question. It's a very important tool in the mix of solutions for a decarbonized energy system. And luckily, this time we can say it's already taken care of because we have the Electricity Market Framework Directive that has to be implemented, completely transposed by the end of this year in all member states. And one of the things that this directive says is that you should have the right as end consumer. So in the light of clean energy for all European, a person, an individual-centric solution, you have the right to ask for a flexible electricity tariff. And having such a flexibility tariff gives you then all the joy of taking a shower if you have an electric heater or a heat pump for no money or even being paid for that. This is happening in the UK. I don't know why the UK has these solutions and the other countries don't, but I only hear from OVO Energy in the United Kingdom that offers this to the end users, and everybody that goes on their flexible tariff is super happy because you shower at 5 o'clock in the morning, you shower for free. And you charge your car the same and so on and so on. But the solutions are there. It needs to be implemented, and I'm very optimistic that we will see it across Europe by the beginning of 2021.
Thank you. Malte, Adrian, any thoughts from your side on demand side flexibility?
Yeah, I think, as Thomas said, there's a lot of self-reinforcing systems that are coming in now. So the clean energy for all packages, Thomas says, and I was going to use the same example from the UK as well. But I think, but then you throw in the renovation wave as well. If you have a well-insulated house and you're heating electrically with a heat pump, your house can effectively become a heat battery because it's going to hold on to that heat. So if you have an if there's a spike in pricing from 5 p.m. until 7, 8 p.m., you can throw on your heat pump at 3 o'clock in the afternoon, heat it for an hour when things are relatively cheap, and your house is warm throughout the evening. And then you heat it again at night when prices are cheap again. So there's a lot of reinforcing things, but we're going in the right direction. It's just a matter of accelerating that and making sure these things are implemented properly.
Yeah, thanks, Adrian. And let me just give you like one concrete example, personal experience. So I just put up, solar panels, right? Great. I have a smart meter. The problem is to read out the smart meter, you actually have to go to your smart meter and see, okay, how much is actually coming in and how much am I putting in the grid? And so I have to buy a separate piece of technology, right, that I need to connect to the smart meter to actually real-time see what I'm feeding in, what is the best time, of course, to do so. And I'm not even talking about my machines here in the house to be connected to that. So that's even a further step away. So my point on this being, as a consumer, I have a strong interest in this on the demand side flexibility also. But there's so many also, let's say, there's a bit of fragmentation, even on the technology side. And so, how can we push a bit more integration, even at the consumer level, to make it easier? So, I don't know, Malte, is that something that you want to have some thoughts on? Or Thomas, you want to jump in?
Sure. I was going to make the point about consumer uptake and, making this at the end of the day easy for the end user, also connected to the previous question. So I think it's a good segue, because even with a number of very clever technologies there, if ultimately there is no demand for these, and that this is kind of translating widely into uptake across society, then that's just a sort of nice academic discussion. And so clearly there is a part of this which is connected simply to developing awareness, understanding, confidence of individual consumers, but also industrial end users, especially the small and medium-sized companies, that these are solutions that are worth investing in and that they can be integrated into their into their households in a non disruptive way, like you mentioned, Christoph, or into your business in a non-disruptive way. But then there is also, I think, a need for avoiding that we start sort of fragmented technology solutions being developed side by side. And I think this is a fundamental point that we have also made, over the years. We need Europe and of course the member states to support innovation with public investments, innovation in technology solutions and in digitalization, but without picking individual technology solutions. We need to maintain this sort of notion of technology neutrality, where the market is able to adapt fast and in a sort of in response to competitive signals to consumer behavior. And that remains very important as we are now talking about this really critical phase of the recovery plan, where there's a lot of money on the table, and the temptation will be to start allocating these funds into particular products, into particular technologies, and that is a risk that we see. So we need to maintain this notion of technology neutrality in this really critical phase that we're in now, where the direction is going to be set for 10, 20 years to come, to avoid precisely this risk, Christoph, that you're describing.
Anybody else want to build on that? And then we have to slowly go towards wrapping up.
Quickly touch on this technology neutrality, because I can't let that stand, as we are in favor of it, but not in the current price mechanism, because technology neutrality benefits from an unbalanced system that we have today, for sure, for the heating sector. So before technology neutrality is applied, we have to look at which fuels are used. And in the words of somebody else, technology neutrality must not be fuel neutrality. So we need to take a preposition first to say which type of fuels do we want, and if it's technology neutrality under the preference of using renewable energy, I'm very happy to support that. The question was on digital, and I think what we will see today, there is a very fragmented situation, and Christoph, that's a pity that you cannot buy one solution for the whole house, but that's also the result of not being economically interesting. And again, I come back to this electricity market directive. I think once it is implemented and it makes sense for you, you will see aggregators that sell you integrated solutions where everything ends up on your smartphone. You don't need to buy an additional piece of kit. Your heating system, your photovoltaic, your car charger, your battery, you will see the results, all of them on your phone. I know it's going to happen because some of the people have talked to me. They say, well, we'll bring this to market next year, but unfortunately you have to wait for another 9 to 12 months to see it in reality.
Yes, I wait with a lot of excitement to see the developments in this area. So I think the organizers have already put up the last poll, so that's a slight subtle indication that we have to kind of start to wrap up. And this is actually what I was mentioning earlier, kind of the word cloud, right? So you should answer to this ideally with one word. And so, we started a bit with Mr. Montesi also talking about, of course, the recovery measures and COVID-19. And so there's a couple of questions here, or the question is, what do you think is needed for the recovery to really support the climate ambitions? In one word, so we'll give you a little bit of time to think about that. And in the meantime, let me kind of use this as an opportunity to wrap up in what I've heard. And first of all, thank all of the panelists for their interventions. I really enjoyed it. I hope the people who attended it too. As the core of the discussion was the energy system integration, we're of course all looking forward to what will happen on July 8th, to the strategy that the Commission will put on the table. I think the feeling overall is that we really welcome a goal on the integration side. A lot of questions still out there with regards to how to ensure this, what I call the regulatory glue. How do we all bring it together? But also the technology glue, right? How, to the last point, how do we make sure that at a technology level, with technology neutrality still there, but still that there is a path of, a bit of convergence around technologies and where we're going. But there's a lot of discussion that's going to kick off as of July 8th. I'm sure about that. The other point I really picked up, of course, is our energy system in the future will still be, of course, there will still be a lot of central elements to it, right? But increasingly, the focus will be at local level. And at local level, that is the city's level, as Adrian was kind of talking about that, but at the consumer level, but even beyond that, right, the industry level. So what is industry doing to kind of address this, and the other sectors? So really the importance of local level, and we need to focus on that, and we need to avoid a disconnect between what's happening at the European level, member state, and local level. And the last point I think that really came out also in the questions a lot was the societal aspect, right? So the point about the impact of digital, we all support and we see the benefits of it, but we also see the impact it might have on society. So to address that, retraining, reskilling, that's still very important, but also the global impact. So how can we help countries outside and regions outside of Europe in taking the next steps? And how do we address that? But also, how do we ensure there is a level playing field? I think a point that Malte made earlier. So those are a couple of my impressions, and trying to summarize the discussion. You see the words coming in on the word cloud. And I think one important word at the center for the moment, I don't think that's going to change quickly, but it's up to you now. You can still kind of vote. Collaboration, right? I think it's visible with the composition of this panel, collaboration across government, industry, society, so kind of from a citizen's perspective, but the city's perspective. So it's really important to have this collaboration. The investments will be crucial. The recovery package will play an important role in that. So I think you'll see the words here coming up. I'll let it run for another, let's say 30 seconds, but we'll have to wrap up. So thank you everybody who joined us. I might see you again. I'm also having another session later, so some of you I might see later. So thank you everybody for attending. Thank you the panelists for joining us. That was it from my side. So I think we can slowly start closing off the session. So thank you.
Thank you, Christoph.